Thank you so much. And thanks very much to the 1455 Festival team and Sean especially for the space to share this work. I'm going to be reading from my chapbook called Lovebirds, and I'll be reading about 3 stories tonight. The first one is called To Fix a Broken Thing. Father comes home from the Islamic Center on Friday and says too many women showed up. Looked like a funeral, he said, and throws his keys on the console by the door. He frowns into the mirror above it. There's a crack in the frame that he has been meaning to fix for days. Mother goes on knitting whatever pink thing she is making these days. It is May and school is nearly out. Father sits down next to her and stretches his legs. It's vulgar women coming to pray. Father doesn't like vulgar things. No one did that at mosques back home. He unlaces the black combat boots he wears everywhere. It's been 12 years since he left the army, 11 since we left Pakistan. Maybe we weren't who we thought we were, Mother likes to say. Once a soldier, always a soldier, Father likes to say, even when he is slicing meat behind the deli counter. He calls it muscle memory. A body remembers who you are, even if you don't. I don't want my muscles to remember, Mother always says in return. I want to forget. She misses guavas off the trees in our front yard, the azan waking her up, her mother's grave. Now she stops to study the stitches on the needle under the light of the lamp beside her, then resumes her knitting. I turn the page in my biology textbook. I'm learning about meiosis and how a thing can become so many different, lesser things. All that kneeling, Father says, all that bending, it gives a man ideas. The women pray behind the men. If you can't see something, does it really matter? I can hear the bitterness. Her voice is ripe with it. Father slowly peels a sock off his yellowed heel. You can be bothered by a thing even if you can't see it. He drops the sock on the floor. They make it sound like they're talking about religion, but I know what they mean. She, that he has stranded us in America. He, that she needs to stop blaming him for her loneliness. She looks down at her hands. Despite the housework, they are beautiful. Slender skeleton bound by skin. The needles pierce the pink holes over and over, and I think I can see inside her how the flesh moves across her bones, sliding, trapped in a perpetual motion. Above her neck, the jaw is clear, defined, pulsing. On her face, a flash of her old self, her heart in her eyes, pain and all. I wish she would let her fingers be still. Father asks if I'm ready for exams. He believes in education, he says, but I must put God first. I nod. I like studying biology and knowing that disorder is necessary for friction, that friction is necessary for heat, that heat breaks bonds. I like knowing how cells split, how that constant quiet violence gives life to the simplest of things, the universe, flowers, me. It comforts me knowing that even God needs to break one thing to make another. Father goes to the bathroom and I hear the shower. We sit in the living room quietly, me on the floor and Mother on the sofa. I wonder what we should talk about. I'm tired. I twist from side to side. Want to go for a walk after dinner? She doesn't answer. In the hallway, the light bulb flickers, then goes out. Someone will need to take care of that, she says, and her hands keep moving. The shower stops. Mother gets up to lay dinner on the table. She fills her time with chores. Everyone looks for things to hold themselves together. I reach over to where she has left her knitting and slide one of the needles out. The empty loops keep their shape, but I know the stitches will unravel at the first touch. Father comes back, towel around his waist. What happened to the light? A drop of water falls from the end of his beard onto my book. I shrug and slide the needle up my sleeve. He misses the most obvious things. What's for dinner? He asks. He keeps hoping for something new. I close my book and go to his room. Every Friday night, Mother makes rice and chicken with cinnamon and the cloves, like she did back home. He knows this. His shirt is on the bed. I hold the needle upright in the middle. It looks like an arrow sticking out of a chest. He is holding the bulb when I return with his shoes. Remember, he says, if you don't fix things right away, they might become useless forever. He slides the shirt over his head. He is always saying things like this, but I don't agree with him anymore. I bend to pick up my books, then remember what he had said about bending and kneel instead. He looks at me, and I try not to look away. Do you understand what I tell you? He says this, holding my gaze so steadily that I feel my heart char. I nod. I don't say what I've learned, that the only way to fix a broken thing is by breaking it over and over until the fractures are so many that the first one becomes just that, the first. He moves to the dining room and I follow. We sit, Mother, Father, and I, and eat. I look at the creases in Father's forehead and Mother's quick, unsettled fingers and wonder if the room feels as empty to them as it does to me. I hang my hand to the side and let the needle slide to my palm. I press it against my leg till it hurts. I like feeling. I could, I think, thrust it at my chest, my stomach, break through the skin to the chaos, the veins, the cells, the center of everything, to the parts that break and breathe and want. I could stab myself over and over until it matters, until I can no longer even moan. I clench my legs. Pray before you sleep, says Father. Mother spoons more rice onto my plate. We pretend we are whole. The second story is called Lovebirds. None of her children have shown up for her birthday, and Soraya sits at the window watching the empty driveway upright in the walnut wood chair that her father had ordered from the most expensive retailer in Lahore for her wedding. What was it, 50 years ago? And ignores the hard-boiled egg and the orange and the glass of pomegranate juice on the tray in front of her. The same tray she had used to carry soup and water to her mother. She can't even remember how long ago. She thinks, feeling the burn from the heater on her small feet, and reaches for the single lovebird in the cage beside her, the silver coop her husband gave her on their 20th anniversary, complete with a bluebird and a sparkle in his eyes and a happy anniversary, darling, even though it was the same year she had lost her mother and happy was the farthest thing from her mind. But he had been feeling guilty, turned out, about his new secret wife, and his affections had become louder and more elaborate until all three kids had learned to say that they wanted a love like their parents. And Amma, aren't you lucky? And her heart had fluttered at the sight of those delicate bird feet trembling on the perch, though later she had wondered if she really was lucky, because that bird died in December, and soon after it, her father was gone too, and then her marriage, when the letter from the husband's new wife arrived, which even now is pressed into her old teaching copy of Sense and Sensibility on the bookshelf behind her, and which she had kept after all the debts, so that every time she stood in front of a classroom of eager girls, she could be reminded never to forgive her husband and to restrain the chirps of the silly girls' hearts by telling them everything died at its most beautiful, and it was best to believe only the words that slice the heart. Truth was never meant to be kind. And now when her eyes spot the little blue edge that sticks out from between the pages, she holds the bird's neck gently between her knuckles and rubs her thumb against the red patch on its head, nearly as soft as the hair on her daughters' heads when they were little, before they layered on hair color and rebellion and shaved and cut and changed entirely how they looked in an effort, she feels still, to rid themselves of her. And she was left with her son, the only one who had remained loyal, that sweet thing, sitting quietly by her bed day after her husband moved out, and who had wanted to give her his pocket money then, thinking it was the anniversary bird dying that had made her cry and wrap her blankets around her as if she was building herself a cocoon. And who, though he comes to see her less and less, pays for her to keep her house now, and who is across the city somewhere with a woman he has come to love more, just like his father. He was meant to sit in the chair beside her today, a good boy, looking out the window as she told him about the dreams she had when she was a child, how she had wanted to train birds to deliver letters when she was young, how she wished her mother had warned her about endings, how she had given up the habit of looking forward and abandoned her yearly walk to the kitchen to hang the scenes of Northern Pakistan calendar the maid and the cook so seemed to like, and asked if he could find a new one for them. Would he do that for her? And thinking of his absence, slowly her knuckles squeeze the small neck between them, and with her other hand she holds the wings flapping strong and getting stronger. She knows they will be the strongest right before the end, until the claws scratching at her lap start to fail, and she tells herself, this is just how life goes, Saraya. This is just how it is. And stares out the window. It is Tuesday. No, Wednesday, perhaps even Thursday. Tomorrow she will break off another small piece of gold from her wedding bracelets and ask the girl who brings her food to go to the market and buy another bird. This last story is called Apartments. That summer, they had almost given up. They went to work and came back in the early evening. They made dinner quietly and politely asked how each other's day was. They watched TV. Sometimes he fell asleep on the sofa and she left him there and went to bed alone. On weekends, they went to the secondhand market down on Liberty Road and rummaged through piles of other people's discards. Snowshoes and teacups and old sports trophies and plaques and sweaters that said Made in USA. She liked to look for things that told a story, and he picked things that he thought might be useful. Sometimes they found something really unusual, like a half-written diary, and then they laughed over it, momentarily excited. But that feeling always passed. In this way, their apartment was becoming a museum of rejection. They spent a long time setting it up with their finds, putting a thing here, then there, then taking it away altogether and abandoning it in the hallway closet for later. They would start in one room, each standing in front of the wall, each with a hammer in hand. He avoided touching her, waiting until she picked from the sack of discards in the center of the room, then reached in. She walked back and forth quietly, talking under her breath, unaware of him. She was faster to decide where to hammer or tape or hang and moved quickly. First one wall, then another, then the floor, then the side table. She strung fairy lights and yarn between windows, wrapped their lengths around shelves, draped the neck of the light bulb. Sometimes she lost interest and left the ends hanging. Her part of the room looked wild, like half-told anecdotes. He considered his decisions. He asked himself whether a thing belonged with another thing. He debated whether it was more important to admire something from a distance or be able to reach it in case he needed to. When he was done, he packed away the hammers and cleared the nails off the ground. By the time he made it out of the first room, she would be sitting on the sofa, sipping water slowly, her eyes on the TV. He knew he should probably say something at the time, something like, good, better, best, you must never let it rest, or something else like that, which would have made her laugh burst through the room, like when they had first moved in. But between the stacks of secondhand magazines and old phones and batiks from Indonesia or Malaysia, they hadn't been able to agree which. They had filled their walls with other people's lives. There was no room left for her laugh to echo. Thinking this, he could never bring himself to speak. Usually, he walked past her to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and stood there drinking it till it was empty. Then he wiped the countertop with his hand, even though there was usually nothing there to clean. Once, from the corner of his eye, he saw her smiling at a ceramic plate she was holding up to the wall. She was standing next to the window in their bedroom, and the sunlight was falling on her face. It lit up the small mole beside her eye. He watched her lean in close, her nose nearly touching the porcelain like she was smelling it. Then she turned her face gently and closed her eyes, her cheek resting against the plate. He wanted to ask her what it was that was making her smile this way, but he had not seen this kind of tenderness on her face for a very long time, and thinking she must be savoring the feeling, he said nothing. Standing in the room, looking at her next to the window, he could remember the time when they had looked at the bare walls and said, "We should do something about this." He had been just as full of love then. The room had been just as bright. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you spending your time with me.